We'd been backpacking through Eastern Europe for almost 3 weeks. A group of 4 friends chasing cheap beer, old castles, and Instagram-worthy scenery. Our latest destination was a small village in the Polish countryside, surrounded by thick, ancient woods that seemed to stretch on forever. The villagers weren't exactly friendly, but they weren't hostile either. Just quiet, their eyes shadowed with something I couldn't quite place. "Stay away from the forest," an old woman warned us as we stocked up on snacks at the tiny general store. Her eyes were milky with cataracts, her gnarled hands clutching a rosary. "Baba Yaga's woods are no place for fools." "Who's Baba Yaga?" Emma asked, smirking as she paid for our supplies. The old woman's face hardened. "The forest witch. She feeds on the foolish. She will boil your bones and wear your skin." We laughed it off, of course. Superstitions and old wives' tales. We were city kids, used to rolling our eyes at stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far from home. The next day, we decided to hike into those forbidden woods, drawn by the promise of an abandoned hunting cabin that our hostile host had told us about. "It's probably full of spiders," Daniel joked, his backpack bouncing as he trudged along the overgrown trail. "But hey, at least we'll get some cool photos." The woods were dense, the trees gnarled and ancient, their branches twisted together to block out the sky. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. Even the birds seemed to have abandoned this part of the world. I felt the first prick of unease, a shiver that crawled down my spine. But I kept my mouth shut. No one wanted to be the one to admit they were scared. After a couple of hours, we found the cabin. It was a rotting, sagging structure that looked like it had been spat out by the earth. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, and the windows were broken, jagged shards of glass catching the fading afternoon light. The air smelled damp, like wet wood and something faintly metallic. "Looks cozy," Michael said, rolling his eyes. He was always the fearless one, the first to try anything, and he strode forward without hesitation. "Come on, let's check it out." The cabin creaked and groaned as we stepped inside. Leaves and debris covered the floor, and a fireplace stood at the far end, blackened with old soot. A table lay overturned, its legs splintered, and carvings covered the walls. Symbols I didn't recognize, jagged and angry-looking. The air felt wrong, like it was pressing in on us from all sides. "Guys," Emma said, her voice tight, "I don't like this. Let's just take a few pictures and go." Michael ignored her, peering into a dark corner. "What's this?" he muttered. He reached down and lifted something, a small carved wooden doll. It was crude, shaped like a human figure, but its eyes had been gouged out, and its mouth was twisted into a scream. As soon as he picked it up, the wind howled through the broken windows, and the temperature plummeted. I shivered, my breath fogging in front of me. Daniel cursed, rubbing his arms. Jesus, it got cold fast. A creak came from the floorboards above us, like someone shifting their weight. We all froze. "The place is supposed to be abandoned, right?" Emma whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Michael set the doll back down, his hands shaking. "I thought it was." Another creak, this time followed by the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. They moved from one side of the cabin to the other, each one heavy and full of purpose. My heart thudded so loudly, I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Fuck this," Daniel said, backing toward the door. But when he tried to open it, the door wouldn't budge. He yanked harder, but it felt like something was holding it shut from the outside. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was a silence so thick it was suffocating. Then a whisper drifted down from the floor above. A woman's voice crooning something in a language I didn't understand, soft and sickly sweet. "Who's there?" Michael called, his voice cracking. The whispering stopped. Then, the fucking ceiling exploded. A form dropped down, landing in the middle of the room with a bone-jarring thud. It was a woman, or something that had once been a woman. Her limbs were twisted and too long, her hair a wild, matted mess that dragged across the floor. Her face was the worst part. Sunken eyes that burned with an unnatural light, a mouth that grinned too wide, revealing rows of yellow, broken teeth. Her fingers ended in claws, black and caked with dirt. "Who dares disturb my home?" she hissed, her voice scraping against my mind like rusted metal. We all screamed. Michael swung his backpack at her, but she moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, grabbing his wrist and twisting. There was a wet snap, and he howled in pain, dropping to his knees. Blood gushed from his shattered wrist, and the woman, Baba Yaga, licked her lips. "Your bones will make a fine stew," she whispered, running her tongue over her teeth. Daniel and I tried to pull Michael away, but Baba Yaga slashed at us, her claws raking across Daniel's chest. Blood sprayed the walls, and Daniel fell back, choking and clutching his torn flesh. The smell of iron filled the air, thick and suffocating. Emma was sobbing, backing away until she hit the far wall. "Please," she begged. "We didn't mean to." Baba Yaga's head twisted, snapping to face Emma. "You intrude," she snarled. "You pay." She lunged, and Emma screamed as the witch's claws buried into her stomach. Baba Yaga pulled, and I heard the sound of flesh tearing, saw Emma's insides spill out onto the floor. "Run!" I screamed at Michael, but he was pale, too far gone from the blood loss. Baba Yaga turned to him, dragging her nails along his cheek, drawing thin lines of crimson. I grabbed a splintered piece of wood from the broken table and swung it at her, desperation making me reckless. The wood connected with her head, and she hissed, more in annoyance than pain. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Brave," she crooned, her grin widening, "but foolish." She grabbed my arm, and I felt her claws dig into my flesh, felt the cold, unholy strength of her grip. She dragged me close, her breath rancid, her eyes burning with a hate older than the forest itself. Then Daniel, somehow still alive, used the last of his strength to throw a burning piece of wood from the fireplace at her. It caught her hair, and flames erupted, licking at her head. Baba Yaga shrieked, her grip loosening, and I stumbled back, gasping. "Go," Daniel croaked, his voice wet with blood. I didn't think. I ran, bursting out of the cabin as the door finally gave way. I ran through the forest, branches slicing at my face, tears streaming down my cheeks. I didn't stop until I reached the village, collapsing in front of the general store, screaming for help. The villagers found what was left of my friends the next day. The cabin was gone, swallowed up by the woods, and Baba Yaga was never found. But I still hear her in my nightmares, that sick, sweet whisper promising that she'll come for me one day to finish what she started. Because no one escapes Baba Yaga's woods forever.